Greetings, brothers and sisters. So, one of my viewers sent me something of a girl who is undermining the Shabbat belief system by scamming it and finding ways to get around it, right? And I don't know much about that. I'm going to look it up before I show you the clip. It's a clip on Twitter. But it brought to mind something that I was covering on my Journey series videos to do with the scammer Dodgy, the guy who runs Heartfulness, a guy who I knew as a good quality member of the Sajmarg meditation that I do. And he's undermined and watered down the system, which is what happens when something, that's purely spiritual, which the Sajmarg system was, years ago, up until he took over, uh, transformed into a religion or a cult or whatever you want to look at it, right? And this is a problem with the global religions. So when you have a system, a religious spiritual system, anything, it could be, also America and the Constitution, right? You have your ideals and goals. You have your dogma and your doctrine, right? You have your principles. You have, in the Christian tradition, you have the Ten Commandments, right? And then you have these other things that are there, the teachings that are there, and the way that you're supposed to behave. And if you do these things, it'll help you get to heaven or whatever the goal is, right? The outcome is. And, people are able to speak about these principles. It also exists here in the truth community, right? Where people speak about, like, how to be honest or condemning people who aren't honest or dishonest in the system. And yet the truthers end up being scammers themselves, right? It happens all the time, where people are talking fire and brimstone about other people and then they engage in those very same behaviors, right? And it's a huge problem. And, Alex Jones, people are always saying, well, he's right about a lot of things. Yeah, because he's a shill and he works for the, he works for, he's a COINTELPRO. He works for the intelligence community. I mean, he's admitted to these things. I, gave all these video clips of him admitting that he's a scammer and a performance artist and he works for these people and he has secret meetings with them and all these things. I mean, he's told you exactly what he is. And you still can't hear it out of his own, you say you trust the guy, but you still can't hear it, right? People don't want to admit that somebody who's talking about things the way that they want to hear them and believes what they believe, like with Trump and the Trumpers, right? He said it himself. He can choose somebody in Fifth Avenue because he's telling these people what they want to hear. And he's convinced them he's like them, which is every scammer does, right? There's a funny line, like a horrible line from the disastrous M. Night Shyamalan Avatar movie, where one of the characters says, "We got to start showing them we believe in our beliefs as much as they believe in theirs." And it's a goofy line, but it's kind of true because people say they have beliefs in a system, in a religion, religions are the worst because religions are what I mean in terms of the like Christian religion. There are things that are going to get you into heaven and things that are going to get you into hell, and they're pretty clear cut. Remember, like there's all these defunct TV evangelists like Jim Baker. Remember, they just made a movie about this. Jim and Tammy Faye Baker, and Jim was fire and brimstone all these people in terms of the gay community and these other people and condemning them. It turns out he was cheating on his wife with dudes. Remember, it's all a scam, doing drugs and things. And then they come out and say I sinned and all these ways of like sort of trying to redeem themselves at the public eye. But I saw this with Dodgy and the people around him even before this, because the Sajmarg, the people who were around Master Chargy, the third master of the system, who was above reproach. He was just somebody who, was a very disciplined spiritual person. And he had a bunch of people around him who sucked. And these people they had good jobs, many of them, and they donated money. And, he condemned them. He talked about them in a video, which I've played over and over again, about their total lack of character. And when he was at the end of his life, they had this system join the the UN, right? And I've talked about this extensively in my Journey series videos. And I was just finding out. This is 2012 when I was just doing research on the UN and covering it. Eventually, throughout the next so many years, like you go through different phases of doing research when you're in the truth community, and also as a presenter. I wasn't making as many videos back then. I was only making one a month. My channel was a lot smaller, but I was doing personal research on the UN and finding out that we were an NGO, the meditation organization I was in, was a real bummer. So I did even more research, and I presented it to these guys who were in charge of it, right? Master Chargy was really sick. He was towards the end of his life. He was going to die in the end of 2014, December in 2014. So, it was a big, transition where these guys were starting to do things that were against the core beliefs. And the second master of the system, Babaji, was asked about the joining the UN, and the UN asked him to join. I think this might have been before NGOs, probably in the the late 50s or 1960. And he looked into it, and he mocked them he wrote a letter to the UN, and he sent a letter to one of the senior members of the system, and he said, "Look at these guys. They want to create world peace by using the modern day weapons." He was mocking them for trying to use weapons to create peace, right? And he wrote them a long letter saying, that the way to achieve peace is through spiritual means, and and he didn't join the UN because he knew it was a scam. But later, these guys who now are running the defunct Heartfulness organization joined the UN, and I wrote them a series of letters, and I presented all this research I had done. And at one point, one guy wrote to me, like a guy who was, he was I knew the guy. He's kind of a good guy in some ways, did a lot of work, but, he was completely, mainstreamed, right, whatever. And he said, we can't miss out on this opportunity. And the UN has done nothing for the system, but, the UN uses these smaller organizations, these NGOs, to, use their platforms to push out their crappy rhetoric. So this guy wrote to me is that, we can't be too idealistic and miss this opportunity. Or we can't be idealistic. And I would go, the only reason I do spirituality is to be idealistic. The idea that God could overcome the not only just on a global level, but on a personal level, that your relationship with God can help you redeem yourself, right? And make you into a better person. It's pure idealism, and I'm like, that's why I do this. And I could tell they didn't either read the books, the literature, or they didn't believe in them. And I've seen this over and over again. And you'll see this with this girl in the Shabbat thing. And, you can see it with Israel, the way they're treating the Palestinian people. And there's the official rhetoric. And there's the way that people want to be perceived. And the way they want their religion to be perceived. But then there's their actions. And this isn't just about religion. It could be about, like I said, the Constitution or people in the truth community, right? But you either believe in something or you don't. Like, I believe in the Sajmark system because it's transformed me, helped me transform myself. And the only flaw in it is me and the people that do it. And our inability to do it the way it should be done. Like, I'm kind of a slacker, I do it, but I could do it better. But, whenever I do it, whatever level I do it at, it has results. And working with God and connecting to God and doing these spiritual principles. I mean, in any religion, there's good, solid spiritual principles. Some of the stuff is, BS. Some of it's been warped. Some of it's, it's rhetoric to bring people in, whatever it is. Some of it's just lies. But the actual spiritual principles and the behaviors and the things that you engage in and the attitudes are there. And, depending on how good the religion is or whatever, but there's something that it was built on that was solid, that was, it's etheric, but it's also, quality, right? It works. And you either believe in that or not. You either believe in God or you don't, right? But to constantly be claiming to be, like the chosen people, or to be, that Jesus is the only Son of God, and all these things that people claim, and the reasons that their religion is better and why their religion is is something worth doing, and all the things that they do, and then acting in a way that is like you don't believe that you don't truly believe those things. You don't believe that God is taking care of you. You don't believe that God is watching over you. And if you're God's chosen people and you're behaving the way that you are in Palestine, then you don't really believe that. You don't believe that Israel was promised you by God, because you have to do manipulative behaviors to acquire it, to reacquire it, or whatever it is. And then you have to engage in these behaviors, warlike behaviors, and you have to employ, Mossad or the CIA to do underhanded things, right? And so you either believe in it or you don't. And if you believe that God is, you follow God's path, then you have to accept where that path leads. And it always leads to difficulties. It's somewhere, and ultimately death, right? God's path, the natural path, is leading you eventually to your own death. There was a Q&A yesterday. This is why I'm bringing this up, because I was thinking about it, and somebody sent me this video. I was thinking about my own thing, and then I saw this girl, which you see, it's kind of funny, right? How she's find ways to scam her religious rituals and practices. But there was this Q&A for American people, and it was classic dodgy failure. It was a Zoom call, and one of these guys was saying he believes in God, but when he meditates, he starts questioning God, and then then he thinks about why does God allow bad things to happen, right? It was a constant question: why does God allow bad things to happen to good people, or why does God let these atrocities happen? And then he brought up what happened with Israel, and then he brought up what happened to the Ukraine with Putin, all the mainstream stuff. And Dodgy butchered the answer. And it is an answer that any person who does Sajmarg understands. First Dodgy said, well, God made a big mistake by giving us freedom of choice. And, that's blasphemy to say that God made a big mistake, right? But we're given freedom of choice. And if we didn't, it would be all robotic. There would be one consciousness, and everyone would share that consciousness, every creature, and you would do things just in an automatic way. And you can see that like with ants and different creatures. They don't have a lot of wiggle room and freedom of choice. Of course, trees and, other rocks and things like this that are, a rock is just going to sit there and be a rock, right? Obeying the principles and laws laid down around its, and it has a spiritual essence, a spiritual life force to it that manifests it and creates it, right? Like everything has that. And then you have creatures, mammals, and then ultimately people that have some freedom of choice and wiggle room and make decisions. Obviously, people have the ability to choose the wrong thing. And we're given this ability so that eventually that we'll learn to choose the right thing. And as we explored the universe and, create our own, path through it, our own sovereign path, but also still being connected to the divinity within us, right? But in that path is our own death, is our own inevitable death. And it's waiting for all of us. It's the only thing really guaranteed to us in terms of life. You're given life, and there's one thing that is going to happen, is your life's going to end. And people have tried to find ways to, live forever, the fountain of youth, whatever it is, prolong their lives. And, there's all this energy to do with that. Of course, being healthy and eating the right foods and doing things like that, that's a positive thing. But, the other things to unnaturally prolong your own life, right? Like God's made some mistake and that there's no reason for you to die. There's a way that you could live forever, which people who do that, at what point do you realize that's a mistake? Like just mercifully end this thing, right? After 1,000 years or 10,000 years? How many, you see these movies where people are immortal and they come down and they get married and their spouses age out and they get married again and their spouses, they just go through all these families. They outlive generations of kids and go through all those things. And just watching their loved ones die over and over again and having to restart everything. These movies like that. And at what point you're like, oh my God, I don't want to be here anymore. Like it's just, life isn't, I'm not talking about being suicidal. I'm talking about just enduring the tragedies and the problems and the issues with life and the pains and the suffering and the losses and all these things. But our movies and our culture and our religions and everything about our system tells you that death is a bad thing. And the way that you die is, I mean, there's better ways to die for your soul to transition back to the source. And there's ways that you die in shock and, trauma or whatever. But the way you die really doesn't matter so much. I mean, it matters in terms of your soul being able to it's nice to die in a way where you're prepared for it and you get older and you're starting to, your soul is starting to migrate over to the other side, to the etheric universes, the etheric realms, and you are starting to make that transition, and everything's better when it's done in a gentle way after you've lived a full life or whatever. You have the tragedy of sudden death for young people or whatever it might be. But in terms of the death itself, it really doesn't matter. And God is an anti-death, and God is an anti-pain, and God is an anti-suffering for obvious reasons, because all these things exist, right? And so, God isn't, I mean, he's allowed these choices to be made. There's this element where there's freedom of choice, and that's there for a reason, right? There must be a reason for that as well. If you believe in God, then you have to have faith that God knows what he's doing, that God, there's some perfection there. But the problem is all these religions think of God as a person. They've made God into a person. This is in all these, this God sitting on some throne somewhere. Of course, the Greek gods and the way God is depicted in the Old Testament, the Jewish Bible, and the idea of Jesus being his son, and they're sitting somewhere in heaven, and they're separate from everybody, and they're human in form. God is a human being, and God feels the same things and experiences the same things as human beings, and that's not the case. God is a different level of sentient being, of consciousness, that, there's no sense of death or separation or any of these things. Pain and fear and love and, all the things that you experience are all, part of the system. They're all, none of it's bad for God. Wars, wars are there, and diseases and, destruction and things, they're all a part of it. And we might not like it, but that's, our own inability to accept the things that befall us. And so people start to game the system. They start to think they know more than God, and that these things can be avoided, or these things can be conquered, or these things can be pushed away. And then you have these, systems of control and, climate control and all these things as ways to negate the ebb and flow of change and discomfort and miseries and sufferings that are a part of life. Everyone should realize that miseries and sufferings and pain and sorrow and sadness and all these things and that befall people, the good things, the bad things, the pleasures, the pains, are a part of life. And you just accept them. At some point, things end. And if it's your country, like it's coming around for America now, and obviously Israel's trying to, prolong its existence. And when you engage in deviant behaviors and manipulative behaviors, and you go against your own spiritual principles, and you deny God's path and God's judgment and God's obviously, the natural flow of things is telling you, all right, this is what's going to happen. And you're like, well, I don't accept that. So you start doing everything in your power to game the system and force an outcome that isn't natural or divine. And that's what we're all seeing now with our system and globally, because people really don't believe in these principles, and they think they know more than God. And that's what they're saying. And it's human nature now just to, have these rituals and practices and not believe in them. Like, people don't believe in their own BS, right? Their own religious dogma and their own religious BS. So let's go to that video clip because it's kind of epic. So to first understand this, I wanted to look up the laws of Shabbat. The Shabbat laws are quite complex, requiring careful study and a qualified teacher. That's always a bad sign. But apparently it's, here are some of the rules. No writing, erasing, and tearing, which I don't understand the tearing. Business transactions, driving or riding in cars or other vehicles, shopping, using the telephone, turning on and off anything that uses electricity, including lights, radios, televisions, computer, air conditioner, and alarm clocks, cooking, basic or kindling a fire, gardening, and grass mowing, doing laundry. And then it says this, Does all this mean that Shabbat is somewhat a miserable affair where we sit in the dark? Not at all. It simply means that we have to prepare for Shabbat in advance, so that on the contrary, we celebrate luxury without doing any of the actual work on Shabbat. Now, it says, for example, lights which will be needed on Shabbat are turned on before Shabbat. Automatic timers may be used for lights and some appliances as long as they have been set before Shabbat. Refrigerator may be used, but again, we have to ensure that it does not engender any of the forbidden Shabbat activities. Thus, the fridge light should be disconnected before Shabbat by unscrewing the light bulb, and a freezer whose fan is activated when the door is open may not be used. Shabbat is a festive day where Jews exercise the freedom from regular hours. It offers an opportunity to contemplate the spiritual aspects of life and to spend time with family. So apparently there are different days, like here it is in 2024. And so I think it's a good idea. My family and I turned off the electricity just to live without it and get away from all that stuff. But not in a, where ritualistic things become stupid, but a way to, to experience life away from the modern day systems. Turn off the electricity and, the blackout that happens and you breathe a sigh of relief, or going camping where you don't have all this, electrical noise and things, electrical pollution, and all this electromagnetic stuff, all these waves that go through your house. And I mean, you can't escape some of it because of the satellites and all the things that are going on, but, get away from, modern day electromagnetic pollution and things. I think that's a good thing. But when you start scamming the system and it becomes ritualistic, well, let's watch the girl's video here. So let me just say this. Doing the Sajmark system of meditation that I do, and all the ancient rituals that are done in India, right? And I grew up with some of these things. In the Catholic Church, right? You learn to say the prayer, you learn to say the rosary, which is one Our Father for every, I think, 5 Hail Marys, these rosary beads you pray with. And this is how you learn to pray. We were watching the Crown, the show The Crown, and the Queen is kneeling by her bed and praying. And I don't know if she did that in real life, but you know how kids kneel by their bed and they, their arms are like folded on their arms are, on the elbows on the edge of the bed as they kneel on the bed and they pray, these things people do in Christianity. And then, of course, the communion and the confirmation and confession that are all part of Catholic Church. Of course, all these different churches have different customs and rituals. You have those snakes that they do up in West Virginia where they hold poisonous snakes and things. They all have their different rituals and things. And India has quite a number of them. And it's different by, the place that you live. And these different kinds of rituals that get embedded over time. And in the Sajmark tradition, you're taught to get rid of these rituals and these applications, these mantras and things that have lost their meaning. They were maybe valid 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, depending on when they started. But over time, it's just like everything else. The essence of the thing gets lost. And you're doing some sort of ritual, and it can have the opposite effect. And one of the rituals they do, one of the mantras they do, is a mantra in which the second master of the Sajmark system said, the mantra is inviting God to come to you. It's asking God to come to you. And what you're doing when you say it over and over again is, God, please come to me. God, please come to me. And, God comes to you, and then you say, God, please come to me, right? It's the equivalent of calling your spouse or your kids or, somebody in your family or your dog even, and they come to you, and then you just say it over and over again, right? Instead of, God's there, then what do you want to do with God? So a lot of these rituals are counterproductive, and it's very simple to connect to God. You just go inside and connect to God, right? You find a quiet place, you forget about your body, you go internally. Of course, we have the transmission, the cleaning that help in that process. but God's inside of you. God's with you. You just have to find a way to you shut off all the mental noise and all the things going on inside your system. People have difficulty closing their eyes and meditating because they have too many thoughts and their minds are out of control. They can't control their thoughts. And when I worked in these treatment centers, there were kids who were, abused kids who had trouble sleeping because when they lay down at night, they would have memories and, past traumatic experiences. And everyone has these things. You have something unpleasant you saw on TV or a song you can't get out of your head or something. And, these are things that you have trouble people controlling their minds and being able to settle on something and get, real relaxation and be able to get peaceful, undisturbed sleep and the rest of these things. And the problem with, the modern day people of these rituals that were in the past is there's a disconnect from their true intention. And back whenever Shabbat started, there was probably no electricity. We're talking about a 5,000-year-old religion or whatever. And so whenever these practices began, they had to adapt these things to modern day life in some way where they're cherry picking certain things that can have a refrigerator, you just can't have the light, and just these other things, right? And again, I don't have any problem with I think it's a good thing every once in a while to turn off the electricity and just get away from all of that. Just see what it's like without it. The internet, especially, or getting into some area out in the country where you're away from all these types of disturbances, what it used to be like. And it's hard to find a place where you're completely away. There's no cell phone signal. There's no GPS. There's no send. There's always going to be satellites. But in terms of all these rituals, there's a better way to connect to God. And there's a better way to pray. Like there's a much better way that I pray now as opposed to doing the rosary when I was growing up as a Catholic, right? The way I pray now is directly praying to God, and there's no kneeling, there's no physical aspect to it. But it's a deeper way to go in and connect to God internally and pray, and it's much more effective, right? And there's simplifying one's spiritual approach to God. And so when I talk about these things, that's the place I'm coming from, right? Something's ineffective and people aren't really connecting to God, and they just go through these mindless rituals. Like when I went to church and, you sit for a little bit and then you stand for a little bit and then you kneel for a little bit. I mean, they go through these different aspects to the service, and people aren't, their hearts aren't into it. They don't even know why they're kneeling here and sitting here and these uncomfortable benches called pews, right? That, and there's a better way to connect to God. And it's, much simpler and much more natural and easier. And, these religions have become relics. And people grow up in a religion, get indoctrinated with it, and they have a fear of leaving it, and, but there's better ways. There's, there's a difference between a religion which acts as a middleman between you and God, and finding God within yourself and everything and everybody, which just takes, a much simpler approach. Having said that, let's watch this girl and her, Twitter list. And the person who sent this to me and the person who posted this said, "And we fooled God."
And here are my favorite Jewish items in my house that just make sense. Light covers. This super cool Shabbos lamp, so I don't have to turn on and off the lights on Shabbos, but I can still have light in my room.
Yeah, that's scamming the system, right? Well, then why do it? Like you either do it the way it's supposed to be done or you don't do it at all, right? Like it's, when things become ritualistic and you're not benefiting from them, you're not embracing it, then why do it? Like if you're not going to do it, just say, this thing's good, but I'm not capable of, getting away from my addiction to electricity.
Something called a mezuzah on every single door, except the bathroom, not in the bathroom. My closet with skirts and dresses, but no pants. Wig stands and wigs. This bin full of hair coverings. This kosher alarm clock.
It's got to be kosher. Like how does a alarm? Remember I, did this thing about kosher dildos, like sex toys that rabbi's daughter was selling. And, kosher is supposed to be something that's about ingredients, right?
This kosher fridge ease light cover. Here's how it works.
It's kosher. So, like, you got to get a kosher one.
and then the light doesn't turn on and off. 2 sponges next to my sink at all times, 1 blue and 1 yellow or pink. A cup with 2 handles. We have those cups at both bathrooms and the kitchen. A pile of pre-ripped toilet paper.
Because you can't be ripping toilet paper on Shabbat.
5 fresh challahs on Thursday night. Wacky mac and cheese. The Jewish version of ramen noodles. A Havdalah set. A Kiddush cup. Tiny Kiddush cups.
Gotta have the tiny Kiddush cups.
Sweet smelling spices for Saturday night. A lot of Sfarim, which are Torah books. A special place in my house for lighting Shabbos candles. And a kid's prayer book. And here are my favorite Jewish...
And so this girl is named Sophia the Jew. And she must be on TikTok, I believe, or whatever. But again, this is what I'm talking about in terms of what's happening with the Palestinian people and Israel. Either you believe that God gave you that land, then, there's some level where you can behave in a spiritual way and stick to your spiritual principles and still retain that land. If you actually believe that it's the promised land, then you don't have to engage in lies and manipulation and, just dehumanizing the Palestinian people and all the things that are going on there and abusing them and treating them, putting them in a concentration camp-like environment. You don't have to do any of those things, right? If, same thing with manifest destiny for the Christians in America. If you actually believe in manifest destiny, then you don't have to engage in the kind of behaviors they did to get rid of the Native American people and, all the things, atrocities that went with it, right? If God is giving you permission for something, if God is wanting you to have something, then you can obey spiritual principles and behave in a spiritual way because God's given you that. Or, you're lying to yourself, right? So here's a follow-up on the aliens thing. Now, I told you what I felt about being a scam, but now there's actually issues here. So here is Miami Police Department, and it's their official site. I guess this is their spokesman, or one of them. And they have Miami cops here, so it seems to be something official for Miami. And this guy's going to tell you what happened.
So just to address a few clips that are going viral on social media right now. First, our response to that big incident in Bayside Marketplace. What happened was there was about 50 or more juveniles that were shooting fireworks at people. There was also some looting going on. So officers that were on that scene were having a little bit of trouble containing it. So they called what is called a citywide 3, which every officer in the city responded. That's why you saw so much police presence for that call to contain.
But they're putting the alien music behind this. Why do that, right? But you see how many cops there were. They're doing this for 50 kids with fireworks that were looting a mall. Like, are you serious? You rolled all these people out for that? Like, that's just a horrible, again, I think, why would aliens show up there? I mean, I don't believe, whatever the story is, sure. The alien thing seems a little far-fetched, and there's no close-up view. We've covered this before. But, this is your explanation that was kids shooting off fireworks?
In that crowd now, there is now video going viral of 8 to 10 foot aliens walking around Bayside. It's actually just a person walking with a shadow. So I can confirm to you all here today right now that there are no aliens in Miami in Bayside Marketplace at the moment. So it's Friday.
At the moment, that there might be some in the future. So, that was bizarre, right? It's bizarre because of, everything. But the same person sent me this. I'm going to turn off the audio here. But this is, this is the Bayside Market here. And they have this building over here. And I assume this is the same building. I don't know. I can't, verify that. But they have cops going in that look like they're tactical units, which I said, these guys have their full body armor. And, these guys are going in there with dogs, and they're clearing these garage areas. They're going through them. And there's a helicopter above there. There's helicopters above the scene. You don't need that for 50 kids who are doing this. So now, they've made it worse by these stories, right? And they're going into these areas and clearing these buildings here. It looks like, it's some kind of parking garage. And, again, a lot of cops and a big response to kids throwing fireworks and looting a mall, right? And now the story just looks like BS. And so um, when when you have a kind of a ridiculous story of aliens, not that aliens don't exist, but why are they going shopping at the mall? Why do they just show up here one day and are walking around the street? Makes no sense, right? Like, what's the aliens' motivation for being at the mall, in Miami? I mean, it doesn't, why would they do that? And again, okay, so that's, it's not a believable story. And so you just have to come up with something else if you're the police and, to justify the response of what looks like, hundreds, maybe at least, 100 or more vehicles, and God knows how many cops are there. So if you have, 200 cops and now you have these tactical units and dogs and things, that doesn't, you have to come up with a reason for something that's big a response, right? And kids throwing fireworks isn't it. So apparently they're saying a tornado went through Miami. Well, here it is, which would be an odd thing. You see there's flashes of green lightning or green light here. And I don't know if somebody could have put that in. That doesn't look like a tornado as much as some sort of like they have those water spouts. But then there's that, right? And so I guess so you can see the power went out. We'll let that cycle again. You can see when let's go back to the original part here where it goes back to the beginning here. But these lights are going to go out and then come back on. There's a flash of green. So all that is, if this actually happened at the same time, and I have no way to verify this, they have these water spouts that are on the ocean. Like this isn't a tornado as much as, see, it's moving these boats a little bit. But it's not, my grandfather used to go fishing, deep sea fishing in Boca Raton, and sometimes they'd have these water spouts that would do this, that would swirl around the area. There's something flying up there. You can see here when these lights are going to flash off in a moment here. Again, I have no idea if this is actually Miami or what it was, or if this is an old video. But it's going to be this explosion here. And right here, it's going to go boom. These things all go dark and then they all come back on. There. Right there. See, they're all going to go dark. Then they come back on. So, kind of interesting, especially if it did happen the way they're saying right around the time of the whole, police alien thing. So they're saying this happened in Fort Lauderdale, which is right next to Miami. That's very close to, it's closer to Boca Raton. That's south of Miami. Tornado rips toward Fort Lauderdale as storms march across Florida. They're calling that a tornado. And so that was from one day ago. So that did happen, according to these news sources. Terrifying moment, tornado touches down in Fort Lauderdale, causing explosions as funnel cloud rips through the city. So that happened on January 7th. Or this is, they say January 5th. So the thing came out on January 6th. So there's the, we saw that there. So that wasn't Miami, that was Fort Lauderdale, and they're calling it an actual tornado, which is different than the water spout. And I searched for water spout because that's what I thought it was. They have the video here. Tornado rips apart power lines and boats and power lines in South Florida. You can see the lightning there. It's not colored, but it's hitting the area. This is a different angle.
Oh no, it's gonna go right over.
See, that's the power lines it's hitting now.
Oh my god.
it's not an area where you would. It's not an area that you associate with tornadoes. So somebody just sent me this. See if there's a volume here.
Hey, holy shit.
This is right outside our window. Oh my.
I think it just tipped over that boat.
So you get the idea. There's different views here. But there was a tornado that hit Fort Lauderdale, I guess, on the 5th of January, whatever it was, a couple days after aliens were seen. So I looked it up. Apparently it hit yesterday, Sunday, January 7th. So that's a week, this would be New Year's Day, week after New Year's Day. It was last Monday was New Year's Day. So New Year's Eve, a week after the aliens showed up in Miami, and it's just also suspect, right? And so they had this over response by the police to kids setting off fireworks and using sticks to loot places, which is, all right, maybe you need 50 cops there. But they had hundreds of them, and, maybe they didn't know what's going on. They could have thought it was one of those tea events, right, whatever it is, one of these, things that happens, right? But why the tactical units and, all these cops was something that's, that's that kind of situation. They only bring in tactical units. And they brought in tactical units and dogs for teenagers. Like, I mean, it just doesn't make sense. And it's a weird response. It's a weird story to come up with when there's this alien thing out there. And then, a week later, there's a tornado. And I guess tornadoes happen more frequently in Florida than I was aware. But they're not very big because of the ocean. They're of a different nature than the devastating tornadoes that hit like Oklahoma and the Midwest and these places. And I don't associate tornadoes with Florida, but I guess they happen there. I've never heard of one before. My grandparents lived there. My whole life I've had a connection to Florida. And I went there quite often. I lived there for a couple of years. And, just all of it. And then I never once heard of a tornado. Of course, hurricanes there and flooding and other things that happen. Severe rain, but, not tornadoes, but I guess they happen. But even in that, it's just weird. It's not believable, right? It's just a, bizarre response and, a bizarre story and, kids looting and throwing off firecrackers, something that sounds almost a little bit mischievous, and that kind of police response. And then this, the whole story that followed, and then the stuff with, they're bringing in helicopters and all that stuff. And then all of a sudden there's a tornado that hits nearby in Fort Lauderdale. It's just weird. And again, I believe that there is extraterrestrial alien life. I believe it's been here and had a relationship with humanity and then just suddenly disappeared about 5,000 years ago and at least pulled back. But why would they just show up and walk down, a mall in Florida? I mean, it makes no sense, but whatever. Well, we'll never know the truth, and that's why I've been doing this for so long. You're never going to find out the truth, and you can just speculate. It can be fun, but not, if you want to go down the rabbit hole, you end up a broken person. Let's move on to the next thing here. So this is all the A-listers named in the newly unsealed Jeffrey Epstein documents. There's been a second release. I'm not really covering this or paying attention to it. Of course, we know Prince Andrew. That's no surprise. He already paid out $12 million. We know Bill and Hillary Clinton because they were, he has a picture of Bill. Of course, we know about the Donald. All these Republicans and Trump fans just forget about or minimize Donald's connection, but he praised Jeffrey Epstein, Alan Dershowitz, that famous lawyer. He's there. Stephen Hawking got his freak on for some reason. Al Gore, Sarah Ferguson, Leslie Wexler, don't know who that is. Chelsea Clinton, of course, she'd be involved with that. Bill Richardson, the former governor of New Mexico. Jean LeBlanc Perel, I don't know who that is. Somebody's important, though. Michael Jackson, no surprise there. David Copperfield, Tom Pritzker, Glenn Dubin, and that's Farik Ferreira with multiple accent marks. Chris Tucker, Kevin Spacey, again, not surprised. George Lucas, Naomi Campbell, Leonardo DiCaprio, Kate Blanchett, Cameron Diaz, and Bruce Willis. So, he had a long list here. And I guess there's Kenneth Starr, the Pope. So, all the usual suspects. I guess there's more out there. I don't know. I'm not really. Again, nothing's going to come of this, right? I mean, it's the same old thing. Nothing's going to happen. Nobody's going to go to jail. Maybe a little bit of embarrassment here or there, whatever. So there's this great meme here. Kid's Guide to the Internet, 1997.
Want to write a letter to President Clinton?
Would he answer us?
I bet he would.
I bet he would too.
This is a great meme. Who had Nephilim in Miami for the first week of January? This is a good quality meme. I meant to put this in before the Clinton, the Jeffrey Epstein thing. Okay, so I wanted to cover this the other day when I showed Anderson Cooper doing his ridiculous, creepy laugh on the New Year's thing with John Mayer. And this has been up for a while, but this is Anderson Cooper.
Establish itself as a The group Moms for Liberty has established itself as a conservative powerhouse in schools around the country. Its members push for book bans and advocate against any discussion of gender or sexuality as critical race theory in classrooms. The group has been embraced by Ron DeSantis, but it's also faced an intense amount of criticism for, among other things, the group's stance on LGBTQ issues in schools. Now, a co-founder of Moms for Liberty is caught up in a sex scandal involving sex with another woman. CNN's Carlos Suarez has this.
This is what I was talking about. So it's good that I waited. I didn't get to cover this. It's always the case, right?
Having sex with another woman in a threesome with her husband is not the issue. But when you claim the moral high ground and then you attack the moral integrity of others, the blatant hypocrisy.
The blatant hypocrisy.
Mrs. Ziegler, and how it reflects on the credibility of this board is a significant concern.
Rudolph Lusek is talking about this woman.
There she is. This dude right here.
Bridget Ziegler.
Know who their candidates are for school board, know where they stand, and hold them accountable.
She's a co-founder of the conservative group Moms for Liberty, and on Tuesday was asked to voluntarily resign from the Sarasota County School Board.
If you were in support of everyone having, these illicit type of relationships, then that wouldn't matter.
Ziegler, a close ally of Florida Governor.
Okay, so that happened. Okay, I'm not sure what this is about. It says here, keep exposing Israel's pedo for protection. If they can let these criminals abuse Israeli citizens, imagine what they do to Palestinians.
A CBS News investigation has uncovered a loophole that allows accused and convicted American pedophiles to escape justice by moving to Israel. So Ian Lee has been following this for more than a year, and he traveled to Israel for this investigation.
Okay, there it is. They're going to copyright the music, so, but it gets, the basic idea is there. So here's this movie. Sometimes I think about dying. So this is a movie that is, I had trouble getting through the trailer. There's a lot of music here which they'll copyright. It stars Daisy Ridley.
The newest member of our little family. This is Robert.
Hello. So Robert and Daisy like hook up in a way.
Hey, Fran. Sorry. But scared ya. I'm sneaking up on people. Booga booga.
A witty, surreal, and surprisingly tender character study. It's about this depressed girl.
I didn't really like anything about that movie.
It's just depressing music throughout this thing. And it's just dark and, dreary, and she's miserable and, just... Sometimes I think about dying. I'd show you the trailer, but there's music throughout, and so they'll copyright it. But this is what they're pushing out as a movie, right? somebody who's, depressed and thinks about dying all the time. NATO nation hit by unprecedented GPS attacks. So it happened in Finland, and some kind of disruptions in the signals used by pilots as well as motorists following previous GPS disturbances have sparked speculation of Russia involvement. Which brings us to this. Apparently this guy went in after Trump. And I haven't watched this yet, but I hear it's pretty epic. 4 more years.
Thank you. Please.
4 more years.
Thank you. Please, thank you very, very much. To fight and win a war against the most powerful empire existed in the world at the time. His mission was clear. Liberty, not conquest. Freedom, not domination. National independence, not individual glory. America made a vow.
Made a vow, America.
Never again.
Never again.
Would we bow down to a king. Months ahead would be incredibly difficult. But General Washington knew something in his bones.
In his bones, he knew it. He had smart bones.
Something about the spirit of the troops he was leading.
The spirit of the troops.
Something about the soul of the nation.
There's a soul of this nation, and he knew it in his bones.
He was struggling to be born. In his general order, he predicted, and I quote, with one heart.
It was the country was struggling to be born. Let's watch that again.
General George Washington knew he faced the most daunting of tasks. America made a vow. Never again would we bow down to a king. Months ahead would be incredibly difficult. But General Washington knew something in his bones. Something about the spirit of the troops he was leading. Something about the soul of the nation. He was struggling to be born.
He meant it was struggling to be born. He was struggling to be born. George Washington was in utero, and he knew this in his bones, and was a baby, and he was struggling to be born, and then he wanted to come out and make sure that this country was, he meant to say that the soul of the nation was, that it was struggling to be born. But he's, JoJo Magoo.
In his general order, he predicted, and I quote, with one heart and one mind, with fortitude and with patience, they would overcome every difficulty, the troops he was leading. And they did. They did.
They did do that. They did.
This army that lacked blankets and food, clothes and shoes, this army whose march left bloody bare footprints in the snow, this ragtag army made up of ordinary people, their mission, George Washington declared, was nothing less than a sacred cause. That was the phrase he used.
A sacred cause. And his dude, Martha at home, knitting a flag.
Sacred cause. Freedom, liberty, democracy, American democracy.
Like this guy who wants to censor the internet, who is putting pressure on social media to not allow you to, threatening social media to pull that title, whatever it is, which gives them, the ability not to be sued for things that are posted by individual users. He wants to pull that away from them, which would make their business impossible. And he's threatening them with that so that they will censor. And he says he wants freedom and liberty because he's, got his Depends thing working.
I just visited the grounds of Valley Forge. I've been there a number of times from the time I was a Boy Scout years ago. It's the very site that I think every American should visit because it tells a story of the pain and the suffering and the true patriotism it took to make America. Today, we gather in a new year, some 246 years later, just one day before January 6th. A date forever
Is that January 5th?
seared in our memory because it was on that day that we nearly lost America.
Okay. What do you mean you nearly lost America? How was that potentially going to, that group of morons, the QB shaman and these other tools that were up there, that somehow they were going to take over America, right? Like they were, come on, bro.
Lost it all. Today, we're here to answer the most important of questions. Is democracy still America's sacred cause?
Woo!
I mean it. 4 more years. Woo! Woo! This is not rhetorical, academic, or hypothetical. Whether democracy is still America's sacred cause is the most urgent question of our time. And it's what the 2024 election is all about.
It's all about that thing. Of course, I can't win legally or by votes because nobody likes me now. And I'm, senile as a poop house rat.
The choice is clear. Donald Trump's campaign is about him.
Him alone.
Not America, not you.
My campaign is about him too.
Donald Trump's campaign is obsessed with the past, not the future. He's willing to sacrifice our democracy, put himself in power. Our campaign is different.
It's different. Ours is about not having him in power.
For me and Kamala, our campaign is about America. It's about you. It's about every age and background that occupy this country. It's about the future.
And the future and the past. The future.
We're going to continue to build together. And our campaign is about preserving.
That's why I'm starting off my speech about what happened in the past.
And strengthening our American democracy. 3 years ago tomorrow, we saw with our own eyes the violent mob storm the United States Capitol.
Exactly. We almost lost America that day.
It was almost in disbelief as you first turned on the television.
I couldn't believe it was happening. You're like those aliens in Miami.
For the first time in our history, insurrectionists had come to stop the peaceful transfer of power in America. First time. Smashing windows, shattering doors, attacking the police. Outside, gallows were erected.
Gallows. They were gonna do some gallowing.
As the MAGA crowd chanted, "Hang Mike Pence."
Exactly. Those MAGAs.
Inside, they hunted for Speaker Pelosi. The House was chanting as they marched through and smashed windows, "Where's Nancy?"
Where's Nancy? Another great man said that. Where's Nancy?
Demanding to know, where's Nancy?
Stop the hammering out there. Who's got a hammer? Where is it?
I don't know.
Where's the hammer? Is it on the... Go up on the other floor. Somebody go up there and stop the hammering. Stop the hammering. Call fuck Griffin. I don't care who the fuck to call. Stop the hammering. Empty out the goddamn control room and find out where this is going on. It's either there or out there somewhere.
Out of control.
Jesus Christ. Crazy sound coming in my ear. This stupid hammering. I told you why I wanted those words cut. It just sucks. It sucks to be out here with this out of control Any thing can come into my ear at any moment. These things. How do you say this guy's last name?
Demanding to know, where's Nancy?
Over 140 police officers were injured. Jill and I attended the funeral of police officers who died as a result of the events of that day.
So just to be clear here, what he's talking about, because I think what he's saying here is fundamentally dishonest. 5 people died on, that day. Ashley Babbitt, she was the Air Force veteran who was shot by cops. Kevin D. Gleason died of a heart attack. Roseanne Boylan appeared to be crushed by a stampede. And Benjamin Phillips died of a stroke. And then the police officers that he's talking about, Brian D. Sicknick of Capitol Police, was attacked by the mob and died on January 7th, and that's how the New York Times writes about it. But when you look it up, it says here, it says the medical examiner, Officer Brian Sicknick, died of natural causes. And I don't even know what that means. Is it a heart attack? That does not change the facts. Officer Sicknick died in the line of duty, courageously defending Congress and the Capitol. So I don't know what his cause of death was. And, natural causes, what does that even mean? But it doesn't seem like he died of any injuries or anything. Acute brainstem and I found it here. Cause of death was acute brainstem and sublunar fractures due to acute basilar artery thrombosis. So he had 2 strokes at the base of his brain caused by an artery clot. And then Officer Jeffrey Smith killed himself after the attack, and Howard S. Lingengood died by suicide 4 days afterwards. And so those are the police that he said he went to their funerals, but it wasn't because of what happened. It wasn't caused by the mob. Maybe stress-related or whatever they want to claim here, right? But it's disingenuous for him to say that in a speech. Is very misleading, right?
Over 140 police officers were injured. Jill and I attended the funeral of police officers who died as a result of the events of that day. Because of Donald Trump's lies.
Because of his lies.
They died because these lies brought a mob to Washington. He promised it would be wild, and it was. He told the crowd to fight like hell, and all hell was unleashed.
All hell was unleashed that day.
He would write them, everything they did. He would be side by side with them.
He'd be side by side with them from his living room as he watched the events unfold.
Then, as usual, he left the dirty work to others.
Yeah, that's true. You got a point there.
He retreated to the White House. As America was attacked from within, Donald Trump watched on TV in the private small dining room off the Oval Office.
Your Oval Office. Oh, wait, whose Oval Office did he watch?
The dirty work to others. He retreated to the White House. As America was attacked from within, Donald Trump watched on TV in the private small dining room off the Oval Office.
Kaboom.
The entire nation watched in horror. The whole
horror. Horror it was. It was a horror.
The world watched in disbelief. And Trump did nothing.
He did nothing. Nothing he did. He couldn't do anything. He just watched from my Oval Office.
Of his staff.
From my Oval Orifice.
Members of his family. Republican leaders who were under attack at that very moment pled with him. Act. Call off the mob. Imagine had he gone out and said, stop. And still, Trump did nothing.
He did nothing. And we almost lost America that day. It
was among the worst derelictions of duty by a president in American history.
It was. He just dropped the ball completely.
An attempt to overturn a free and fair election by force and violence. A record 81 million people voted for my candidacy.
For him. They voted. He got 81 million votes, this guy. 81 million people overlooked his senility, his goofiness, his pooping in his Depends diapers, his plagiarism that he did on his first campaign, his first of 4 failed campaigns, his complete groping and sniffling and snoozling little girls and women and boys or whatever when he was signing their parents and grandparents in to the Senate when he was vice president, the multiple gaffes, the lies, the embarrassing things that CNN called him out on and told him not to run in 2016 because they'd rather have Hillary than him. They chose Hillary over him. The Democratic Party did. They wanted Hillary over him in the first place. But somehow this guy got 81 million votes because of, Trump hatred.
and to end his presidency. Trump lost the popular vote by 7 million. Trump's claims about the 2020 election never could stand up in court. Trump lost 60 court cases. 60.
60 of them.
Trump lost the Republican-controlled states. Trump lost before a Trump-appointed judge, and then judges. And Trump lost before the United States Supreme Court. All of them. He lost.
4 more years.
Trump lost recount after recount after recount and state after state. But in desperation and weakness, Trump and his MAGA followers went after election officials who ensured your power as a citizen would be heard.
He went after him. Trump is just a bad guy. And we got to remind all this coming into 2000.
These public servants had their lives forever upended by attacks and death threats for simply doing their job.
Just doing their job. That's all what happened.
A brave black mother and her daughter, Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, were doing their jobs as election workers until Donald Trump and his MAGA followers targeted and threatened them, forcing them from their homes and unleashing racist vitriol on them. Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, who was just hit with a $148 million judgment.
Exactly. That's totally fair. $148 million for criticizing somebody doing their job or not doing their job or accusing somebody of doing something is worth more than murder or, I covered this, lawsuits for murder and wrongful death or whatever are, all these other kind of things, abuse. They're like under $1 million. These two women who still are alive got $148 million for a guy who's hawking vitamins on a podcast that gets about 4,000 views. A face-melting Rudy Giuliani, who was stiffed by Trump, has no money left, and he's got a podcast now where he's hawking supplements. He's probably making like $50 a show. And he's got to pay out $146 million
for cruelty and defamation that he inflicted against them. Other state and local elected officials across the country faced similar personal attacks. In addition, Fox News agreed to pay a record $787 million for the lies they told about voter fraud.
Fox News bailed on Trump that night. They were first to call it for Biden, and they didn't stand up for Trump, and then now they're, out all that money and the whole Tucker Carlson thing. Anyways, I'm sure there are more gaffes to come, but this is how he's kicking off his campaign. And somebody sent me, there's a poll somewhere, he's only got a 30% chance of winning the presidency. Like that's how bad off he is. Kind of going to be interesting in a way, but, it's not going to be as fun as previous elections. It's just, we've seen the gas before, and Trump sucks so bad. Trump's a disaster. A Jeffrey Epstein palling around disaster. I continuously be interested in this show because it just keeps on getting better and better, and, there's just always new aspects and twists and turns. I don't know if this election's going to have anything to offer, but, I'm open to it. We'll see what happens. Anyways, I got some more stuff to do. I was going to do it today, but I'm going to cover the Golden Globe a little bit, either tomorrow here or on my other channel, or I'll cover it here 2 days from now, probably. I guess Kevin Costner did the Barbie speech. I guess Barbie got pretty much skunked at the Oscars, which, at the Golden Globes. We'll see about the Oscars or whatever. But it was a horrible movie. Anyways, only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting from the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.